Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today I'll be doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees the release of The Little Mermaid, which is actually coming out tonight stateside for the Thursday night premieres. And thanks to Gary of Nerdrotic, he is giving us homework on Friday Night Tights to watch this movie. So I will get my report on the film back when I get back from seeing the film sometime this evening. And you can just tell, hopefully, by my demeanor and my voice, how excited and thrilled I am for that prospect. But we'll talk about Little Mermaid's box office projections, because right now it is projected to do $180 million worldwide, which worldwide is really, really bad, is really not good. However, it's not all bad news, because the domestic showing, at least for its opening weekend, does show, hey, there's at least some people interested in going to see it. But what does this actually mean for the long term, especially now that we know the film cost around $250 million to actually make this movie? We'll talk about that as well. Before we go further, please make sure you smash that like button, lap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know time your video or live stream goes live on the channel. So as you can see over at Deadline, The Little Mermaid to be part of that world. I see what you did there. The $180 million global start this weekend. As it says, Disney returned to live action takes of their animated vault. And I think live action's being very generous, seeing that the vast majority of what you're seeing on screen is CGI and green screen, blue screen, or whatever the heck they're using, and very little of it is actually real world. Even the actual sets and the actual buildings and everything, it seems like most of it is CGI in some way. So I think using live action is a bit of a stretch these days when it comes to these actual films. It goes on to say, this weekend, Rob Marshall's Little Mermaid eyeing $180 million worldwide start. The majority of that number, and by majority you mean the vast majority, is going to be stateside with $120 million for the 4-day Memorial Day weekend and around $100 million over 3 days. Now, what is interesting is that Deadline is reporting around $120 million for the holiday weekend, for the Memorial Day weekend, around $100 million for the 3-day, and yet we see a little bit of a different number if you go to Box Office Pro. They right now have the 3-day of around $117 million, and they think the 4-day will get upwards of $150 million. Now, they are using this based off of a range. So if you look at The Little Mermaid, their 4-day range is between $130 and $155 million. But in either situation and in either case, that is still quite a bit more than what is being projected by Deadline and some other industry experts. So it'll be very, very interesting to see, where does this film fall? Does it go well below the $100 million for the 3-day, below 120 for the 4-day, or does it do a little bit better? Word of mouth will ultimately determine this. There's been, at best, mixed reviews for this movie. I saw that Jeremy Johns put out his review earlier today, and I believe he gave it the rating of, it's a good time, no alcohol required, but at the matinee price, which is not really the greatest review and not really the greatest rating for him to give the movie, but it's not terrible, right? It's not the worst rating he's ever given in a film. And so I think that does seem to indicate he tends to be a little bit better as far as being able to kind of coincide with what the general audiences tend to feel about certain movies. So it seems like this is probably going to get some type of a, maybe a C or a B level from the audiences, which ultimately, it's again hit or miss, right? I think you might ultimately see a pretty big opening weekend domestically, especially, and then you'll see probably a pretty drastic drop-off coming next weekend if I had to guess, but we'll have to wait and see for the film to actually come out before being able to actually speculate on it. If I go see the film and the film is just really, really bad, even at an objective level, then yeah, it's going to be hard for me to possibly see the way and the pathway going forward for it, but we'll have to wait and see. When it comes to the international numbers, though, this is abysmal, all right? So again, they're expecting a $180 million start, meaning they're only thinking $60 million. $60 million coming from the international market. Now, this film cost around $250 million to make, right? So based off of that and typical marketing cost, the break even for this film is roughly around $625 million. Maybe some would say it's closer to $750 million if they're using a 3 times multiplier. In either case, this film needs to make a pretty decent amount of money already worldwide if it's going to have any hope of breaking even. The one positive element it has going for it is that it seems the vast majority of its money is going to come from domestic. And as many of us know, right, the first 2 weeks, especially in the domestic market, tend to be those strongest weeks, not just for the movies, but also tend to be the highest takes from studios when it comes to the relationships with theaters. And so it's good for them to make that much money up front, but also for it to be that much more money domestically where they get a higher return that also could be seen as a good sign also. However, 625 million is still a pretty large thing to be able to reach. And these days, we know for a fact that this movie is not going to be able to get anywhere close to that just from the domestic market alone. And so if it's not going to show up internationally, that could pose a lot of problems for it. So we'll have to wait and see. Looking at the long-range forecasting that Box Office Pro had put out, right, earlier they had said they were expecting it to have the 4-day weekend of around 115 to 143. So as you can see, their overall numbers have actually gone up a little bit. So they are definitely tracking this film as performing a little bit better. That could be a result of an increased number of pre-sales, could be an increase in their social media presence. There's a lot of factors that go into how Box Office Pro comes up with their number versus how people like Deadline and other industry so-called experts, how they come up with their numbers. But what we can say for sure is that they are projecting the film domestically to end somewhere between 271 and 379. And so my guess is, based off of this opening weekend change, maybe they would be willing to bump that up to between $300 and $400 million domestic. Whether the film actually does that, that remains to be seen. I don't really have a lot of confidence in that number. And especially when you start to compare this film to other movies, it starts to become a little bit more of a question of how much money can this film actually make? Looking at the actual release for the film, as you can see, this movie is getting released in several countries the same day or around the same time. So whether it's Australia, whether it's China, whether it's France or Germany, it's getting released there all the same weekend. Where it's not getting released, though, is Japan. And now what's interesting about Japan is that it's a very different market. If you go back to 2019 to Aladdin, the film actually did pretty well there. In fact, it was the highest return for as far as the live action Aladdin film. It was the highest international country outside of the United States. It made $112 million in Japan. So actually a pretty decent showing there, especially when you're comparing that to $91 million in South Korea, $53 million in China. Again, those are some pretty impressive numbers to say the very least, especially coming from all three of those countries. Definitely not the highest in China, but the fact that it had Japan and South Korea to kind of offset that is definitely a good sign for it. But that was Aladdin. That was 2019. And that movie also, I would imagine, just because the film wasn't very good, I can kind of probably see The Little Mermaid getting a very similar reaction, where you're going to have some people that are going to enjoy it. They're going to enjoy some of the new songs, some of the new music, some of the adaptation that goes into creating something that's so quote unquote live action versus animated. I'm sure there's going to be some people, right? Those people do exist. But we also have to remember the international market is very, very different these days, right? We saw this a lot with different countries when it came to the Super Mario Brothers release, to the Fast 10 release, right? We're seeing how international markets are not nearly as reliable and are not nearly as strong, especially depending on films. Domestically, we've seen kind of a similar trend, but we've also seen a lot more people being a lot more wary and a lot more careful with how they spend their money. Whereas they used to spend money on films that didn't really look like they would be all that good, but they would go and spend the money just to go and see it. Nowadays, you're not really seeing that nearly as much. And so the fact that the film is set to have a pretty strong domestic opening, again, if it actually does that, if it actually performs to the level and the degree that both Deadline and the Box Office Pro people are saying, which again, I have some doubts about, but we'll have to see. It's going to be interesting to say the very least of where this film possibly could end up, because Aladdin made $1 billion. I don't see this movie being able to do that, right? Because if you look at the $355 million for Aladdin, you're saying to yourself, okay, maybe that's like a best case scenario for Little Mermaid as far as its domestic numbers. Maybe it does that. Maybe it hopes to possibly do that. But you look at that 691, and if it's opening to $60 million, all right, and itself being released in the vast majority of countries, and it's only projected to get $60 million from all of these countries combined, including China, including South Korea, unless you're going to say, oh, well, Japan, that's not going to release there until June, and so, hey, we could see another $100 million from there. We saw that back in 2019 for Aladdin. Yes, but remember that Super Mario Brothers movie, right? Super Mario, Nintendo, that film got released there, and that film might be lucky to get to $100 million when everything is said and done. So we look at that and we think to ourselves, okay, Japan really is not a guarantee. And when you have these types of delayed releases, right, when you're releasing in a country about a week or two after the initial release date, it does take a little something away. And unless a film has a lot of momentum and has a lot of positive word of mouth, it's not likely going to be able to do something in one specific market that's going to be able to have any type of impact. And so I look at that international number and I think to myself, okay, even though we could definitely talk about how domestically that seems to be a pretty decent number, Right, it seems to be pretty strong. Well, let's go ahead and try and see if we can come up with some comparisons, though, to see where this film actually falls. And we've talked about this on the recent live stream from the other day, but we're going to pull up the last few live-action, quote-unquote live-action remakes that they have done in theaters and what these films have done. All right, so Aladdin back in 2019, and these are all adjusted for inflation using the numbers inflation calculator, $104 million opening weekend. The Lion King, $218 million. Beauty and the Beast, $203 million domestic opening. Domestic totals for Aladdin was around $405 million when you adjust, $620 million for Lion King, and $587 million for Beauty and the Beast. Internationally, $788, $1.2 billion, and $890 million respectively. I'm looking at these numbers and I'm thinking, I do not see The Little Mermaid having a path to be able to do as well. All right, so it's projected to make around $100 to $120 million over a holiday weekend. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, Aladdin actually came out around the same time, so it would have also been helped by the holiday weekend. It did a little worse, right? So right now, Little Mermaid is projected to have done a little bit better, or around the same amount, right? For this opening weekend, I'm assuming this is the 3-day and not the 4-day opening weekend, so maybe roughly around the same amount of money. But if we look at these numbers, right, we see the $28 million on that first Monday. So comparing it, $133 million, right? We like to do this live. So $133 million is the 4-day total for Aladdin, right? So the Memorial Day weekend back in 2019, 133. So right now, if you go just based off of what is coming from Deadline, this film is expected to come in underneath that movie. So yeah, it looks good in comparison to some other films that have come out more recently, especially look at the Fast and Furious 10. Fast and Furious 10 only made 68 or so million. So this is essentially going to double what the opening weekend was for Fast 10 with the 4-day versus the 3-day, which of course you all know I've got my own issues with when you make those comparisons. But nonetheless, it is still strong in comparison as far as opening weekends, even without the 3 and 4-day, even if you're just doing the 3-day versus the 3-day, $100 million versus $68 million, for instance. But when you're looking at these other numbers here, $133 million after over 4 days versus $242 after 4 days versus $219 after 4 days, you're starting to realize, okay, domestically, this film is going to be underperforming, is going to be coming in well underneath the other live action remakes. Okay, so that means that $400 million probably not in play for Little Mermaid. Okay, percentage-wise, what does that mean? Maybe $350 million. Okay, but what about internationally? Okay, all right, we're not seeing those same kind of numbers coming from the international market right now from this movie. If you're gonna put all your eggs in the basket of Japan, I'm sorry, but that's just not going to be a reliable model in a reliable country for you to be able to say that's where all the money's going to come in and just you wait. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is I think $1 billion is by far just out of the question as far as a possibility for this movie. And I think even breaking even, right? $625 million. If even you're willing to admit that's a conservative low end break even point, does this film get to $625 million? I don't see the pathway for it at this point in time. But those are the numbers for The Little Mermaid. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think this movie is going to end up being a domestic juggernaut, right? Is this film going to end up doing better than what the opening weekend? Because obviously, if it overperforms versus the $120 million, if it does better than what Aladdin did, if it gets close to what Aladdin did or some of the others, okay, then we might have a conversation. But if it's not going to do that, and right now it's not projected to, and on top of that, it's not going to get anywhere close to the international numbers that those other movies did, we're looking at a potential flop here for Disney. And Disney has had way too many flops. And if their live action remakes start to lose money and start to lose money to a pretty insane degree, as this film potentially could, yeah, let's just say it's not a good look for Disney. And I think some people might need to start getting fired if that is going to continue to hold true. But those are the thoughts that I have on these numbers. What are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, like the 5-minute Aussie, smash the rumble button. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my patrons at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with my patrons over on Patreon, Father Luca Illich, Hymir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, who you can check out over at his YouTube channel, Orange Chat Reviews, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel of Eagle Rider, and Miss Modern Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check him out over on Twitch, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my local supporters, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. Thank you all very much for supporting me at that Keep It the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shout out at the end of every video and live stream, make sure to check out the top link in the video description in order to get access to that. Also, there's a level where you get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with my friend John the Flip Flickinger, and also to a giveaways channel on my Discord where you get access to the giveaways of various 4K titles, including right now I've got a 4K Steelbook for Training Day. I got the 7th Seal from Criterion, Plane Trains Automobiles, Kubo and the Two Strings, They Live, Train to Busan, tons of others every single week, every single month, rather every single week. I'm going to stick by that. We're doing this live. I just recently gave away the 3 Steelbook collection for John Wick franchise, the amazing Stash Book Collection version. So if you want to have access to various things like that, hey, check out that top link in the video description below. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.